what do we know? President Trump says this was a successful operation militarily and politically. Do you agree?
Well, the first thing to say is it was an American operation. The United Kingdom was not involved in any way. We were not informed of it beforehand. So it's not for us to judge whether it had been a success or not. That's for the Americans to speak to. I think the important thing now, given the events that have unfolded over the last 48 hours, is that we are quickly able to get to a point where we can get to a peaceful transition to a president in Venezuela that has the support of the people of Venezuela.
Well, look, though, I want to come to some of that in a second, but you must have a view about, for example, whether this was lawful.
It's for the Americans to set out the legal basis for their operation. This was their operation, not NATO, not ours in any way. I don't think the Americans have done that yet. I'm sure they will do in due course. Of course, the United Kingdom abides by international law. We're advocates for international law and the rules-based order. But I can't give you a view right now of President Trump's legal basis for his operation because that's for the Americans to explain.
So of course, the Americans will, and indeed President Trump did explain what he thought the legal basis was. He was going after a couple of drug dealers, Mr. and Mrs. Maduro. Surely that should give you some basis for deciding whether you think this was lawful or not. Because frankly, if it's just a straightforward abduction or invasion of a foreign country, we didn't think Mr. Putin's invasion was lawful, so why is this one?
Well, as I've said on your show in the past, in other circumstances around the world, it's not for politicians to make judgments around international law.
You did make a judgment. You made a judgment that Putin's invasion of Ukraine was unlawful. What's different about this?
Well, as I say, it's for international courts to make judgments on international law. It's not for me or for any other minister or opposition politician to make a judgment on that. As I say, it's for the Americans to have the legal basis for their operation. I can't, as a UK government minister, speak on behalf of the American administration.
Look, well, let me just ask you about a very practical point that this morning. Is the United Kingdom government going to recognise the new president's administration? We think the new president is Mrs. Rodriguez. Are we going to recognise that administration as the legitimate government of Venezuela?
Well, look, I think we need to wait to see what unfolds in terms of the detail of that question over the coming days. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, the United Kingdom, but also our European and other allies, will be engaging with their counterparts in the United States and with our embassy, of course, in Venezuela to understand what the next steps are. I don't think it's clear yet what the situation is in Venezuela, so we can't.
The French have decided that
that
Mrs. Machado, the opposition leader who it is thought actually won the last election there, is the legitimate president. They can make a decision. We seem completely unable to make any decisions about anything on this.
It's not for the French or for the British to decide who the president of Venezuela is. It's for the people of Venezuela to make that decision, which is why we say...
So Macron was wrong to announce that he recognised Machado as president.
That's why we say the transition is now important. Whoever becomes president of Venezuela should do so democratically with the consent of the people of Venezuela. It's not for a third country to make that decision on behalf of Venezuela.
The de facto president, I suspect, actually, and he more or less said this yesterday, is Donald Trump. You said we weren't warned of this raid. Do you feel a bit uncomfortable that our closest ally, with whom we have a special relationship, goes and attacks another country where in a region where we have a lot of interests, a lot of former colonies and so on, and didn't bother to mention it to us?
Well, look,
It's Grenada all over again, isn't it?
Well, I think that's probably slightly different. Grenada, of course, Commonwealth connection, and of course that was a different time when Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and the Queen were told about operations there. But I think the situation in respect to Venezuela is different. Congress in the United States was not informed, let alone allies or other countries around the world.
Yeah, but that's because they thought Congress would leak. Are they saying that... you're saying that the Americans think that our government, our Prime Minister, your number 10 operation would leak as well. That's why I didn't tell you.
No, that's not what they've said, and it's not what I've said. All I'm saying is that we were not informed. We were not part of any operation. We had no contribution to it, and it wasn't a multinational operation in the way that it might be in other circumstances.
All right, look, let me get one other last question on this. Mr. Trump yesterday said that the United States would now run Venezuela until it decides to do otherwise. I think we used to have a name for that. Colonialism. Are we now in favour of colonialism?
We're not in favour of colonialism, and we're not entirely clear yet what President Trump meant by those comments yesterday.
No, he's pretty clear. He says, we're in charge until we decide otherwise.
Sure, but it's for the Americans now and for Venezuela to set out what happens in the coming days. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, we shouldn't make assumptions or guess what might happen next in certain hypothetical scenarios.
We don't have to make any assumption. President Trump has been pretty clear. He said, we are going to run Venezuela. We will decide when we can stop running Venezuela and pass on power in his word was, judicious way. It's pretty clear. We must have a view on that, surely.
But we don't know the shape, the timescale, the details of that. And as I say, we don't know yet.
So colonialism is all right as long as it's in the right form?
No, that's not what I said. All I said is...
Well, it is what you said.
No, it's not what I said. What I said is we don't know the details yet of what's happening in Venezuela. And it would be wrong for government ministers to try to make assumptions or to comment on hypotheticals about the future. We're engaging with our counterparts. Of course we are. Our embassy is working in Venezuela. But we should understand what's going to happen next before we comment. That's what the public would expect of a grown-up professional government to do.
No, I don't think so. I think the public would expect a grown-up government to be consistent, because I suspect if it had been anybody but the Americans, as in the case of Russia, if the Chinese did something similar in the Pacific, you would say exactly what you said about Putin. But we don't seem to be able to say this about America. Well, what would happen if they decided... And he was pretty clear about this too, when he was asked about Cuba. What would we be saying if this were not Venezuela, but Cuba, or Panama, or Greenland? Is it sort of okay for our allies to waltz in wherever they think they need to snatch somebody who's done something naughty?
So, Trevor, I think a lot of the basis of your previous two questions, again, are around assumptions of things that may or may not happen in the world. I can't go through all of those.
They're about what Mr. Trump told the world yesterday.
No, I think you're pushing them to the extreme there. As I say, the UK respects international law and the rules-based order. We are an advocate for it. We conduct ourselves on that basis, and we expect other countries to do so as well. There's no question about that. But as I say, what's happened in Venezuela has happened. We now need to try to move as quickly as possible to transition to a legitimate leader of Venezuela. But that is a decision for the people of Venezuela.
Let me try this in just one final way. Prime Minister said yesterday that he's an advocate for international law. Can you cite any element of any international convention or law that gives the United States permission to go to a foreign country, abduct its president and his wife, recognised, by the way, by other countries, and take them to an American jail? What piece of international law supports that action?
Look, I'm not qualified to give an answer to that
Prime
question.
Minister said he supports international law. He must have been pretty clear what he had in mind. And he hasn't told you what he has in mind?
Neither of us will make judgments on that question. It's for the Americans to set out the legal basis for their operations. We are not spokespeople for the American administration, Trevor. We're spokespeople for the UK government.
I'm asking you not about the operations. I'm asking you about what the Prime Minister said about what we think as a country. He was clear. He supports international law. And I'm just saying, asking you, what element of international law can you imagine supports this particular action?
You're asking me what the legal basis for the American operation was. I'm not a spokesperson for the American administration. Okay. It's for them to set that out.
All right. Mr. Trump has warned Iran this week not to fire on protesters. Do you think this is a warning to Supreme Leader Khomeini?
Again, you have to ask the American administration. I'm sorry not to be able to answer your questions, Trevor, but I'm a British government minister. I can tell you what the position of British policy is.
You can see why this is so peculiar. You lot come in and tell me again and again how close we are to the Americans. The Prime Minister is very influential with Mr. Trump. He's the Trump whisperer and all that. Mm-hmm. When Mr. Trump does something like this, suddenly we weren't told. We don't really have an opinion about whether it's legal or not. We don't really have an opinion about whether it works or not. You can understand why it feels a little bit odd for you to be saying what you're saying.
No, I disagree. When it comes down to a sovereign issue about the UK economy or Britain's interests, of course we are involved, and of course we have an important relationship with the Americans, where that relationship has effect in relation to whatever issue it is you're talking about. When it's something that's unilaterally an issue for the United States...
You guys never have any trouble with saying what you think about what Putin has done, or what Netanyahu has done, or what has been done in other parts of Africa or Latin America. Suddenly, when it's the United States, we have nothing to say. We don't know. It's only the United States business. What happened to all of the promises that you made before the election about standing up for international law, for human rights, for doing things by the book? Mm-hmm. By the book,
yeah.
By the way, was your prime minister, was your leader's a big mantra? And by the rules, I beg your pardon.
And we, the United Kingdom, do that and shall continue to do it, because
and we expect our allies to do it, don't we?
The rules-based order relies on countries around the world following it. That's how it works. But as I say, I can't comment on the administration of another country about issues that relate to their country. I'm not a spokesperson for other countries, Trevor.
All right, let's talk about some domestic questions. 18 months ago, you came into government offering political integrity instead of chaos, economic growth instead of austerity. Let's look. At the end of last year, when I last spoke to one of your colleagues, you'd lost 5 ministers through their own errors of judgment. Growth was flat. Prime Minister said last week in his message to Labour Party members, puts restoring hope at the top of his agenda. What's the hope here?
Well, look, let me tell you about hope, and then let me tell you about the 2 points you raised, because I disagree with your conclusions on both of them. Look, the question for 2026 is this is our second full calendar year in government. Lots of the things that we have gotten on with starting to deliver in 2025 will start to become a reality for people across the country, whether it's around pay or public services or their community. And so what the Prime Minister has been talking about is that this is a year where we kind of turn the corner from a very difficult 14, 15 years since the banking crisis, and we start to see those green shoots for people across the country. But look, on your question of ethics and integrity, the reason 5 ministers have left is because Keir Starmer's ethics framework worked. We updated it compared to the Conservatives. Remember, Boris Johnson tried to let everybody get away with everything? Keir came in, independent ethics advisor, proper process. That has worked in all of those circumstances, which is why those people have gone. And on economic growth, last year we were projected to grow by 1%. We grew by 1.5%. That was against the odds. And in relation to the other wealthiest nations in the country, was the second quickest growing economy in the G7. So is that good enough? No, of course, we're more ambitious than that. But actually, in the context of what's happening in the world, it was a pretty good start.
When might we come back to have this conversation at the end of this year? Growth per head, which is the measure of living standards, has been flat through the period of your office. When you come back at the end of this year, will growth per head per capita be higher?
Well, we actually prefer, if you want to get into it, we prefer real household disposable income as the measure of economic growth.
Yeah, I know, but I'm asking you about...
No, I understand. But the reason I say that is because GDP per capita can change depending on the size of your population. What really matters is whether people at home feel like they've got more money in their pocket by the end of the month. That's real household disposable income. And that's the measure that we use internally in government to track whether economic growth is delivering change for people. That's what will be measured against.